Well, we've left it to our last speaker to speak for the other 70% of the planet that is not on dry land. Dr. Enric Sala is a National Geographic Explorer in Residence, might be familiar to many of you, and he's founder and director of the National Geographic's Pristine Seas initiative, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to inspire country leaders to protect the last wild places in the ocean. To date, Pristine Seas has helped create 13 marine reserves, some of which are the largest on the planet. I'd like to read Dr. Sala's many awards, but why not just hear from Enric himself instead?
The ocean, yeah, 70% of the planet, 99% of the living space on the planet. And how much of that is protected? Well, let's start with the question, how much do we want to protect? And scientific studies suggest that at least 30% of the ocean should be protected to achieve a number of conservation goals, and 50% should be protected to achieve also a productivity goal, to help replenish fisheries in the other half, right? The good news is that in the last decade, we've seen a dramatic increase in the global ocean area that has been protected, right? The bad news is that today, only 1.5% of the ocean is in implemented, fully protected areas. And fully protected areas mean areas where there is no fishing, no oil drilling, no mining, no extraction of natural resources. And when we look at the total area of the ocean that is in marine protected areas, is a little over 3%. A few countries announced big new reserves, like Chile, a couple of weeks ago, and that's going to bump the percentage a little bit. But still, we'll still be slightly over 3%. Right? And that's on marine protected areas, half of which allow fishing. And some of them allow all types of fishing. Right? And why are we focusing, why am I emphasizing fully protected areas? Why? Because fully protected areas work better than partially protected areas, areas that allow fishing. We just published a paper that shows that fully protected areas have a biomass of fish, that tons of fish per hectare, which is related to everything else that is good in the ecosystem. So the biomass of fish in these fully protected areas is almost 700% greater than in the unprotected areas nearby. Whereas partially protected areas that allow commercial fishing cannot even double the biomass of fish, right? So this is what we want to see. If we care about actually having nature that is restoring itself and being functional and producing all these good things for us, that's what we need to do, fully protected areas. And these fully protected areas work not just for the fish, but also for the people. This is an example of the first marine reserve where I dived and where I did all of my PhD work on the Medes Islands Marine Reserve in Catalonia, in the Mediterranean. And this is a place where the fish came back, and then the divers came in. And a single square kilometer of full protection, 1 square kilometer, which is the size of a few city blocks, brings 12 million euros through ecotourism to the local community every year. And also the fishermen around the reserve, now some of them quit fishing and open hotels or diving centers, which is more profitable. But the ones that remain fishing, they are having greater incomes, because what happens when you don't kill a fish? They take a longer time to die, right? They grow larger, they have lots of sex, they make lots of babies, and many of these fish spill over the boundaries of these reserves. And the fishermen are having a better time outside. Another example on a developing country of the coast of Mombasa in Kenya. The income of fishermen doubled in only 3 years, thanks to a fully protected area. And that means for them was to go from $2 per day to $4 per day. They went out of the poverty line. And I hear, yeah, whatever. You help to protect all these areas, but then what happens? Climate change is going to destroy everything. Well, science shows us that areas that are fully protected are more likely to bounce back after a warming event, like the Phoenix Islands fully protected area in Kiribati in the middle of the Pacific that suffered from that massive warming event last year and a half that killed 70% of the corals on the northern Great Barrier Reef. But this place is fully protected and is full of large animals. And this place is coming back spectacularly. It doesn't look like it actually ever bleached. So full protection makes places more resilient and more likely to bounce back after warming events, which is helping us to buy time while the leaders of the world are trying to figure out how to reduce, how to shift to a fully renewable energy economy. So this is why here at National Geographic, we decided over the last 9 years to work on these fully protected areas, using a combination of what National Geographic is well known for, exploration, research, and also media. And in the last 9 years, we've been to 23 of the wildest places in the ocean, and we've helped to protect 17 of them now after the last week's announcements, 17 covering an area of over 5 million square kilometers. And what do we define as wild? For us, a wild place or a near pristine place in the ocean is not the place necessarily where there are no people. It's a place that still has abundant large predators, be it polar bears or seals or sharks, where these large predators, like the equivalent of the lions or the jaguars of the sea, where these predators are so abundant that their populations are self-sustaining. And if you have an area that can contain a population of predators that can replenish itself, then everything below, the entire ecosystem that is needed to support those predators will be there. Right? So that's the way we are looking at it. So we are very proud that we have helped. When we started Pristine Seas, only 0.1% of the ocean was in fully protected areas. Now, almost 2% of the ocean is in fully protected areas, and we are very proud of it, but this is far from sufficient. We are not doing a good enough job. So how are we going to get to 50%? And we are very pragmatic, and we are going to divide the ocean. We are starting a study to identify what needs to be protected and where, the same way that a bunch of colleagues are doing for the land. And it is better to divide the ocean in units that make sense from a political management point of view. So we have the high seas, or international waters, which is the light blue area here, which goes beyond the 200 miles exclusive economic zones, the country's waters that are under the jurisdiction of coastal countries. And then we have these exclusive economic zones, EEZs, in white. The high seas are 60% of the ocean. And 2 recent studies suggested that if we closed all of the high seas to fishing, the fish that migrate between the high seas and the country's waters, like the tuna and sharks, their populations would increase, they would reproduce more, and the spillover to the EEZs, to the country's waters, would increase fisheries yield by 30% without having to increase the fishing effort. And also, that would mean that developing countries now would be able to catch these fish within their waters, because now only a few countries, like China, Taiwan, Korea, Spain, Japan, have the ability, the resources to have a long-distance fishing fleet, and they basically catch all these fish before they can get into the country's waters. And the high seas is, when we're looking at the global food production, it's not such a big deal. We have another study coming out now showing that only 5% of the fish caught in the ocean comes from the high seas. And these fish do not contribute to food security, because these are luxury food items like tuna or orange raffy that are sold in rich countries. And also, on aggregate, fishing in the high seas is not profitable economically without billions of dollars in subsidies. So there's a good opportunity to close, if not all of the high seas, huge parts of the high seas. But the real problem, the urgency, is within the EEZs, where 95% of the fish are caught, and most of the diversity of life in the ocean lives. To do that, how are we going to get to at least 30% of the EEZs protected? We've worked with some countries like Palau, Niue, Chile, the United States, until now, where that protected more than 30% of their waters in fully protected areas. So it can be done. And the way we think it has to be done is by protecting these last wild places, places that are a little remote, with less people, places where we can help to create very, very large, fully protected areas, and then decentralize conservation, because conservation is too important to leave it in the hands of governments, or at least some governments. And we need to see the creation of tens of thousands of smaller marine reserves that will be managed by local communities, like in the case of some African parks, and will have local benefits. But for that, we need to move from the traditional mentality, mind frame of marine conservation, and adopt some of the methods that we've seen in African parks, in Gorongosa, in American Prairie, and use a business approach. And this is what Pristine Reckberger is developing, this fish banks concept, where we know that these marine reserves are a good business. So why don't we create them as if they were a business, where you protect the place, and the more fish in the water, the more economic revenue and jobs are going to be had. So that's the next step. We know what we need to do. We just need to get to work and really, really scale. And Ed, thank you so much for your inspiration. Thank you.